Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're going to get into part 8 and part 9 of the Hannibal series by HistoryMarche. Let's get into it.
It's summer, 217 BC. Having decided not to march on Rome, Hannibal went back across the Apennine Mountains. He ordered that all military-aged Roman males that were encountered on the march were to be killed. But the Carthaginian general had reasons to worry. His army fought in 3 battles without ever fully recovering from the crossing of the Alps. And by now, the men showed signs of scurvy and the horses of mange, both caused by vitamin deficiency. After 10 days, the Carthaginian army reached the Adriatic Sea. Hannibal allowed the men to rest and recover through eating the plentiful produce gathered from this rich area. The horses were bathed in the sour wine, which had been captured in great quantities to restore the condition of their coats. Meanwhile, Publius Cornelius Scipio was sent as proconsul to Iberia, with reinforcements of some 30 new ships, 8,000 troops, and fresh supplies. What persuaded the Senate to divert such valuable resources to Iberia at a time when Hannibal was on a path of destruction in Italy was their desire to prevent reinforcements from reaching Hannibal by land. But more importantly, it was the Senate's determination upon a long-term Roman involvement in Iberia, made possible by Gnaeus' success on the battlefield at Tarraco and Ebro, as well as his flexible diplomatic methods through which he forged treaties of neutrality and alliances that brought many Iberian tribes to the Roman side.
Okay, so this is what I was talking about in regards to the Roman honor and just the thought process and viewpoint of the Romans overall. They are diverting these resources for essentially what's going to be a Roman sphere of influence in Iberia after they win the war. That is the thought process, is either we are going to lose this war and none of this is going to matter, and literally we're going to be wiped off the map, or we're going to win, and Iberia looks like a place where we would like to be involved in the future. They have a lot of silver there. It just kind of makes sense. So the thought process is literally always this super long view of like the greatness of the Roman Empire. So that's the thought process here. Well, Hannibal's a huge threat. Sure, he is, but if we end up beating him, Iberia is going to be nice, so we should probably figure out that Iberia thing. That's kind of the way that Rome handles these situations.
It is Gnaeus' ability to act autonomously without waiting for directives from Rome that gave the Senate a strategic advantage halfway across the Mediterranean, where they could otherwise exert no direct control. The Senate felt assured that by supporting the Scipio brothers in Iberia, Rome would have good prospects for fighting the Carthaginians in their own backyard. Back in Italy, with the army restored to health, Hannibal continued advancing down the coast. He sent a message by sea to Carthage, reporting on the situation in Italy. The Carthaginian Senate expressed delight with his progress and promised aid to support his campaign. Meanwhile, the appointed dictator Quintus Fabius Maximus took command of Geminus's remaining 4 legions and went after Hannibal. Replacement of the terrible losses at Lake Trasimene required an emergency levy of 2 additional legions, which brought the dictator's army to around 40,000, including allies. It is possible that some of the new recruits were very young and older men, originally intended for Rome's city garrison, with some in the process of being trained while on the march. Fabius was a man in his late 50s, rather old by the standards of Roman generals, but he was a proven commander. Having been awarded a triumph for his victory over the Ligurians during his consulship in 233 BC, he also held the position of censor in 230 and was elected consul again in 228. Now, as dictator, he was yet to reveal his plan on how he will deal with Hannibal. So far, he had been advancing cautiously.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea that he's holding his cards tight to the vest, because the Romans are going to absolutely hate him and his ideas. His idea is basically to not confront Hannibal. If all of these Roman armies keep getting their teeth kicked in every time they confront Hannibal on the battlefield, then let's stop confronting him on the battlefield, and maybe we'll stop losing some of these armies and be able to kind of regain our footing as far as, having troops that are trained and being able to just kind of be able to gain some sort of balance and gain their footing, having just been smashed up and down the Italian peninsula since Hannibal set foot in Italy, right? So that's the Fabian strategy, is basically to shadow Hannibal, keep close track of his movements, but do not confront him directly, and kind of wait for Hannibal to make a mistake. And that's his thought process. Probably saves Rome. It was probably the best idea. It was probably, honestly, pretty damn brilliant. Brilliant enough that Fabian strategy is still studied in military academies to this day. But, the whole Roman honor thing, they absolutely hate his strategy. They hate it.
Carefully scouting ahead to give himself plenty of warning of the enemy's presence. Meanwhile, Hannibal pillaged and burned his way down the coast, accumulating vast quantities of grain, cattle, and other produce. His plan was to reach southern Italy, where he expected to sway some of Rome's allies to join him. The two commanders met for the first time in northern Apulia, encamping just 10 kilometers apart. Hannibal immediately offered battle outside the Roman camp. But no response came from Fabius. The Carthaginian general waited long enough to impress his own men with the enemy's timidity before leading the army back into camp. The following morning, Hannibal continued the march, ravaging the countryside as he went, in an attempt to goad Fabius into battle. He provokingly went past the Roman army back into the Apennine Mountains. But the Roman dictator merely followed the enemy and apparently had no intention of risking a battle under any circumstances. This was certainly wise, as nearly half of his army was made up of raw recruits, and some of the men were in awe of Hannibal, who had defeated the Roman armies on 3 occasions that year.
And didn't just beat them, but beat them soundly, convincingly, swept those Roman armies off the field. So yeah, Hannibal is a big deal in Rome at this time.
But Fabius's strategy wasn't too popular in Rome. Notwithstanding the disasters at the Trebia and Trasimene, powerful elements of the Roman Senate still believed that Hannibal could be defeated in a pitched battle. Although he was appointed dictator, the Senate restricted Fabius's freedom of action by denying him the right to choose his own second-in-command. Instead, they foisted upon him Marcus Minutius Rufus, a former consul. Nevertheless, as Hannibal continued across the Apennines, Fabius shadowed him. The hilly country favored the Romans, allowing Fabius to stick to the high ground and only encamp in positions that Hannibal would never risk attacking. The dictator's plan was to deprive the enemy of food supplies by launching small-scale attacks on Carthaginian foraging parties, not inflicting many casualties, but making it difficult for them to gather food and fodder. But he would never risk a direct confrontation. Fabius also instructed inhabitants of surrounding villages to take with them all of the animals and food that they can, before destroying and burning everything that's left behind.
Yeah, because think about it here. Hannibal is in a foreign country. He is wholly dependent on everything around him to survive, right? This goes back to the Steppes tribes and how they dealt with major powers trying to come and get them to capitulate, where they would just do scorched earth. They would burn everything and go further inland. And because you can't have an army survive on nothing, then the army has to either eventually turn around or give up or whatever the deal is. But they can't just keep marching and marching and marching with no food, no water, no anything, right? So that's the thought process here, is you take away the ability for, they don't totally take away the ability for them to forage, but they hamper it as much as they can. But really what they're trying to do is get the big stores out of the way. Like nowhere where they can just go and completely restock in one place. They want them to have to struggle to forage. And this is basically the plan, right? You're either going to slowly starve them out, you're going to frustrate them into doing something dumb, or they're going to just move to a position that is strategically advantageous for the Romans to, have their battle. But in no way, shape, or form is Fabius about to, just go toe-to-toe with Hannibal. It's not part of the strategy. He's not going to do it under any circumstances, no matter what gets burned, what gets taken, anything.
And seek refuge in fortified towns. This tactic, which would later become known as the Fabian strategy, served not only to deplete Hannibal's forces, but also to gradually rebuild Roman military confidence. Hannibal understood that he needed to force an open battle in order to exploit the tactical superiority of his own army and prevent the situation from developing into an exhausting war of attrition that he cannot sustain. He clearly appreciated the implications to his war effort if Fabius would continue with this new strategy. But the cunning Carthaginian general had a plan. Fabius showed great skill to keep close to the enemy without giving him an opportunity to fight. But by the time Hannibal passed the walled city of Beneventum, the Roman army had fallen 2 days' march behind. The Carthaginian general planned to enter Campania and devastate the Agri Falernus, perhaps the richest area in Rome, famous for its exquisite wines and fertile land that made it the breadbasket of the Republic. He felt that threatening such a prominent area, inhabited by Roman citizens, would either provoke Fabius into giving battle or demonstrate at last Rome's weakness, which would hopefully make Capua, Rome's second largest city, switch sides, along with other cities. Upon entering the valley, Hannibal unleashed his troops, ordering them to strip the region of supplies and then burn all that remained. Immense amount of valuables were taken, as well as vast quantities of supplies and cattle. While Fabius's strategy was already unpopular, now his political power began crumbling as quickly as the burning rich estates and villas. But even when urged to seek battle by an angry Minutius, as well as other officers and displeased troops, the under-pressure Fabius would have none of it. Even though...
So, I want to point out how terrible this looks for Fabius. How just everybody hates it. His own legions hate it. His own officers hate it. His second in command hates it. The Senate hates it. Literally everybody hates this strategy and hates him, right? It is totally just flies in the face of Roman honor to allow a foreign invader to come and just pillage your land and do whatever he wants, burn everything to the ground, and do nothing about it, right? So I cannot emphasize enough how much everybody hates this. I also can't emphasize enough how much this was the right strategy. If Rome doesn't do this, if they just send another army and another army and another army, they probably lose the war in Italy. The Fabian strategy gives them a chance to again, just rebuild their stuff. One of those things being confidence in the Roman military. You have a ton of green troops that need to be trained, need to be brought up to speed. There's just a whole thing that goes along with this that allows the Roman military and the Roman Senate to kind of regain their footing. So as much as everybody hates it, it in all likelihood saved Rome and was absolutely the right way to handle this situation. But they're going to end up hating it so much that they're going to get him out of there. They just cannot take the idea of just allowing Hannibal to do this.
Though the Agri Falernus was burning, it was not enough to bring him down from the hills to challenge the Carthaginians. Ironically, it seems that Hannibal was the only one who understood the implications of Fabius's plan. Hannibal failed to provoke an open battle, and despite the vast plunder that was taken, it was clear that he could not winter in the valley, as it couldn't sustain his army until spring. He needed to establish a base where his army could winter and enjoy the spoils of its raiding. Several points led out from the valley, but Fabius had already strengthened the garrisons on the river to the south and placed small contingents on the eastern and western ends of the valley. Trying to force his way through any of these fortified points would be dangerous for Hannibal, and his plan was to come back the way he came, where he already knew the lay of the land. But the Roman dictator stationed 4,000 legionnaires on higher ground that would block the pass through which Hannibal intended to exit, and he encamped with the rest of the army on the hillside further west, from where he could attack the Carthaginian rear once they tried to march out of the valley. Hannibal knew he was hemmed in, and that once his supplies dwindled, he would be forced to launch a direct attack against fortified Roman positions on unfavorable terrain, where his cavalry would be unusable. And the longer he waited, the worse his situation would become. So he began making preparations. Finally, a few weeks into the stalemate, Hannibal ordered the troops to eat a hearty supper and go to bed early to get as much rest as possible for the night ahead. As all activities in the three camps quieted down, the guards remained on their posts, and the campfires lit up the night sky. It seemed like another uneventful day had ended. But about an hour before daybreak, a mass of torches appeared, heading across a small ridge in front of the pass. It seemed that Hannibal decided to force his way out after all. Thinking that they were being outflanked, the 4,000 Roman troops holding the pass left their position to block the enemy's movement. Little did they know that the column of torches weren't enemy soldiers, but thousands of captured oxen with burning branches tied to their horns, guided by Carthaginian camp followers. Upon reaching the milling animals, the legionnaires halted in confusion. Then, out from the darkness came about 2,000 Iberian javelin men. Although outnumbered 2-1, they were more nimble than the heavily armored Romans, and much more accustomed to fighting in the rugged terrain. As the fighting raged on the ridge, Hannibal was already moving with the rest of the army in total silence. He planned to flank the Roman contingent through a very narrow passage that was now left unguarded. Fabius saw the torchlight and heard the noise of the fighting, but refused to move from his camp in the darkness, despite the urgings of his officers and Minutius in particular. Given the problems of fighting a night battle and the relative inexperience of his soldiers, Fabius probably made the correct decision. He had no way of knowing whether or not Hannibal was setting up another trap, and it is questionable whether the Romans would have been able to locate and intercept the enemy in time.
Yeah, they would have had to have just gotten lucky to stumble into the actual Carthaginian army here. And again, Fabius's whole thing is he does not want an open conflict that is unpredictable. If he's going to fight a battle, it is going to be in the most favorable terrain and positioning and, with the most favorable defensive works possible. That's why he set up the way he did around this valley, is so if Hannibal had to attack somewhere, it had to be to fortified positions that were extremely advantageous for the Romans. This is a situation where the advantage has swung from the Romans, and so Fabius is just like, nope, we're not doing it, we'll live to fight another day.
And indeed, Hannibal was able to ascend the pass without any opposition and escape with his army and plunder intact. As daylight broke, the Carthaginian general reacted quicker than his opponent, sending a force of Iberian infantry from the rear of the column to support the embattled and outnumbered troops on the ridge. The lightly armed and agile infantry managed to not only relieve the javelin men, but inflicted heavy losses on the Roman contingent. The way in which Hannibal extricated his army from a seemingly hopeless situation became a classic of ancient generalship, finding its way into nearly every historical narrative of the war and being used by later military manuals. Fabius had been humiliated for allowing his enemy to escape. Even before Agri Falernus, many in Rome and within the army resented the dictator's passive strategy. But while Fabius's political reputation suffered, his troops actually gained valuable experience under his leadership. More importantly, he prevented Hannibal from potentially destroying another Roman army, which would have undoubtedly persuaded many of Rome's allies to defect. And now he was following Hannibal back across the Apennines.
Yeah, so again, everybody in Rome hates this strategy, right? They hate Fabius, they hate the strategy. It flies totally in the face of Roman honor to essentially just let him go up and down the Italian countryside as he pleases, burning and looting and all that. But the brilliant part of this is that Hannibal understands how brilliant this strategy is, because he knows the reality of the strategic situation on the ground, right? He knows what his reality is, being this far away from allies and from anything that could possibly give him help. So he actually sees that the way to win the war is to beat as many Roman armies in the field as you possibly can. And that this strategy, the Fabian tactics here, are actually helping Rome as much as Rome hates it. Hannibal sees this brilliance in the Fabian tactics.
The two commanders would meet again. It's late summer, 217 BC. As the fires across the Agri Falernus valley died down after months of Carthaginian raiding, the locals returned to their burned towns and cities, struggling to bring their lives back to normal. Having outwitted Fabius, Hannibal escaped the valley. And now there was real fear in the Roman Senate as the Carthaginian general marched north towards Rome itself.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do part 9 here. We may go ahead and go through part 10 also. I'm not sure, but we'll play it by ear. But we're going to go ahead and get into the next part.
Escaping the Agri Falernus valley with his army and plunder intact again highlighted Hannibal's genius. And as the Carthaginian army now marched north along the Volturnus River, fears in Rome were reignited that the attack on the city was imminent. But despite the road to Rome being open for the second time, Hannibal marshaled his army back into the Apennine Mountains. His string of victories was not enough to secure alliances in Italy, and the Carthaginian general knew that without a firm foothold in the plains of Campania, he needed to establish winter quarters in a better strategic position. Heading back east to his old campaigning ground near the Adriatic coast was a prudent decision. Encumbered with plunder and herds of cattle, the Carthaginians moved slowly, cutting a swathe of destruction along their line of march, ravaging farms and property, collecting provisions and prisoners as they moved, unopposed by Fabius. While this unchallenged destruction of Roman lands and the prior escape from the Agri Falernus valley were the two latest embarrassing incidents that caused outrage against Fabius in the Senate, it was in fact his strategy that preserved the Roman army from potential destruction. Thanks to Fabius, the Republic stayed in the fight, which arguably kept their Italian allies from joining Hannibal. Yet, due to his cautious war plans, Fabius's popularity in Rome was crumbling, and his allies in the Senate found it impossible to rally political support around him. It also didn't help that, by now, news spread throughout Rome that Fabius's property and lands were spared during Carthaginian raiding of the Agri Falernus valley, which cast further doubts about him. The Roman
Yeah, so again, another brilliant stroke by Hannibal. Whenever he's burning these properties and these estates to the ground, he actually leaves Fabius's stuff alone. That makes everybody think that Hannibal and Fabius have some sort of deal worked out, and that Fabius is basically letting Hannibal do this. He goes from unpopular to almost like, I mean, geez, people are so over him and want him out so bad that they are willing to ruin the title of dictator forever to get rid of him.
The Roman general tried in vain to improve his reputation by selling parts of his property to ransom Roman prisoners from Hannibal, after hearing that the Senate would not fund their release. But despite the unabating criticism against him and demands for a more aggressive stance, he kept to the Fabian strategy, refusing to be drawn into a battle not of his choosing, and continued to shadow Hannibal. His scorched earth policy had a very limited effect, as many citizens refused to burn their towns and crops, but it did manage to hamper the movement of the Carthaginian army, which did not have a secure supply chain and had to live off the land. Meanwhile, Hannibal reached a place he deemed suitable for his winter quarters, the town of Geronium. It is unclear if Geronium was taken by force when Hannibal's terms were rejected, or if he took possession of the town after the inhabitants fled. Either way, Hannibal encamped just outside the town and had his troops repair the collapsed wall, as well as surround the town with a trench and a palisade, turning Geronium into a fortified granary for the Carthaginian army, where provisions and livestock were stored. The sick and wounded recovered in the camp, as thousands fanned out to forage the fertile plain to the west, while others pastured the cattle and horses on the hillsides to the east. With enough provisions to last until spring, in a strong defensive position, with several roads offering multiple mountain crossings into Apulia, Geronium was the perfect place to winter with an army. Meanwhile, in the foothills across the valley, the Romans arrived some 3 days later and began encamping. But the dissatisfaction in the Senate finally boiled over, forcing Fabius to depart for Rome. Officially, he journeyed to the capital to observe religious duties. However, the more likely reason for his absence from the front line was to confront his critics and explain his actions, in an effort to salvage any support he could for his campaign. While the political discussion raged on, back in the Roman camp near Geronium, Minutius assumed a more aggressive stance. As second in command, he was left in charge of the army with orders to follow the Fabian strategy. But, eager to put pressure on Hannibal, he set up camp in the plain, from where he sent out parties of cavalry and velites to hunt down the Carthaginian foragers. Although most of the foragers escaped unharmed, Hannibal moved quickly to protect his foraging grounds by sending 2,000 Libyans to occupy the ridge overlooking the Roman camp. And just to the south, he established a temporary camp where he stationed 2/3 of his army.
Yeah, so Hannibal, again, he understands the brilliance in the Fabian strategy. Now that Fabian is back in Rome, and he's tried to push the Romans into this idea of getting Fabian out because he wants these open battles, right? That's the whole name of the game for Hannibal, is he wants the open battles. So now that he sees that there's somebody in charge that's a little more aggressive, he's like, okay, well, we'll set up shop right next to him and we'll see if we can bait him out into a fight.
Eager to square up against the enemy, Minutius sent the heavy infantry towards the Carthaginian camp, while his light infantry and cavalry went for the ridge. This seemingly created a problem for Hannibal. Not only was he outnumbered, but he left his cavalry in the main camp. Whether he did this intentionally to appear weaker and trick the Romans into attacking, or because the horses needed resting, he now lacked the mobility needed for the clash against Minutius. With superior numbers and mobility on their side, the Romans took the ridge. Seeing his chance to put more pressure on the Carthaginians, Minutius moved his camp to the top of the captured hill. Expecting another attack, Hannibal restricted all foraging operations, keeping the troops in a state of readiness within the forward camp. But Minutius stayed put, and after a few days of inaction, the Carthaginian general finally broke the stalemate by sending troops to forage in ever-increasing numbers each day, until eventually some 4,000 men were committed. Dispersing so many troops in the surrounding countryside, while already being outnumbered, begs the question, did Hannibal so desperately need provisions for the winter and was forced to forage? Or did he want to weaken his position, perhaps even appear incompetent, to provoke Minutius into fighting and winning a few skirmishes, with the aim of luring the Roman general into a trap once he became overconfident?
Now, there are historians that think both of those and have, their whole spreadsheet of like reasons why they believe that. I tend to lean towards the second one. If you follow Hannibal, especially throughout the Second Punic War, he really doesn't do things on accident. Everything that he does has a very specific purpose. He's very, very calculating all the time. They have all of the stuff from the other coast of Italy. They have their spoils of war. They've been foraging all the way back to where this camp is set up. I think he's trying to bait them into a major battle. But it's dangerous how he's doing it because he has quite a few troops out foraging. And, he's put himself in a very vulnerable situation, much like he did just a minute ago when he moved his camp up without his cavalry. But I tend to lean towards he's trying to bait him here.
Whatever the case, Minutius answered in force. He led the heavy infantry against the Carthaginian camp, while sending his cavalry and light infantry through the back gate to hunt down the foragers. The skirmish was a bloody affair, with the Romans getting the better of the engagement, killing many of Hannibal's foragers. Realizing it was time to regroup, Hannibal marched back to his main camp. Exaggerated accounts of this victory caused widespread rejoicing in Rome. Senators and citizens alike believed that they finally had a commander who can defeat Hannibal. Hailed for his success, a law was hastily passed that made Minutius co-dictator, which was effectively a return to having two senior magistrates in charge. But things did not go smoothly. Fabius urged caution, while Minutius wanted to take aggressive action. Due to persistent arguments over strategy, Fabius proposed that they command the army on alternate days, or split the army into two independent commands. Minutius decided to take 4 legions and establish his own camp.
Yeah, so again, this just kills the idea and office of dictator. Obviously, the whole idea of a dictator is it's a break glass in case of emergency kind of office. In times of extreme political or military peril, you put one person in charge and give them kind of ultimate authority, because democracy, even, not full democracy, just kind of partial democratic, it's very sloppy, it's very slow, and don't get me wrong, it's a good kind of system, but it does not handle situations where things need to be done very quickly super well. So the idea is you give all this power to one person, and then they can kind of sidestep the slow process whenever they need to. If you have 2 of them, then there really is no point in having them. You might as well just have consuls, which is basically what they have here, is just 2 consuls like regular, and they're going to split into their consular armies.
Just as the sun rose over the plain beneath Geronium, the guards woke up Minutius. Hannibal was just outside the camp. For the second time, Hannibal positioned himself on the ridge, from where he could observe all activities in the Roman camp. Minutius was not about to allow him to control the engagement. The Romans advanced confidently, having previously driven Hannibal back from the same ridge and forced him to retreat to his main camp. Minutius was now determined to finish the job. But this time, Hannibal was ready. As the Roman light infantry crashed into the Carthaginian line, it seemed like their push will again drive back the enemy. But just as his men began giving ground, Hannibal reinforced the line with troops hiding just beyond the ridge. Minutius responded by sending the Roman and allied cavalry up the hill. From his vantage point, it seemed that the Carthaginians have just about enough men to hold off his light infantry, and he was determined to break the stalemate. But as the Roman cavalry closed in, Hannibal called upon his Numidian and Spanish riders, who poured over the ridge. What seemed until now like another skirmish turned into a proper battle. Outnumbered, the Roman line quickly lost ground and was pushed back down the hill. With his cavalry fully engaged, Minutius was now unable to scout the battlefield for potential ambushes. Nevertheless, he ordered his legions forward, fearing that his troops in the front will get overrun.
Yeah, so what do you do here? If you're Minutius and you sent your cavalry in to kind of turn the battle, but they end up getting picked up by the Numidian cavalry that Hannibal has, then what's your move? Because you don't know what else Hannibal has. There's a ridgeline here. You really have no other sight of the battlefield other than what's right in front of you. But if you hold back, If you hold back because you don't have that sight, the troops you've already sent in are going to get overwhelmed and get cut off. And if you do send them in, there could be troops anywhere. It's a very dangerous and precarious situation. So what do you do here if you're Minutius? Do you pull back and regroup and decide okay, well, we'll get as many of these troops back as we can from the front line? Or do you go protect and reinforce the front line and just hope that there aren't any other troops kind of hiding anywhere?
However, what the Roman general didn't realize is that he was sending his men straight into a trap. During the previous night, Hannibal led 5,000 Libyans and up to 1,000 cavalry, dispersing his men in groups of 200 to 300, ordering them to conceal themselves in the ravines, hollows, stream beds and tree lines to the north and south of the ridge. The skill and discipline of Hannibal's troops was evident in the flawless execution of this potentially dangerous operation. And now, as Minutius's heavy infantry advanced up the hill, they collided with the overwhelmed Roman cavalry and light infantry, losing their cohesion. At that moment, Hannibal signaled his concealed troops to attack. From the mountain slopes across the river to the north and the ravines to the south, Libyan infantry and cavalry leapt forward.
If this is an individual consular army with nobody else around, it probably gets wiped out completely here.
Some 3 kilometers away, Fabius could see that another disaster was looming. Left with no choice but to help the embattled troops, he ordered his men forward. Back in the valley, thousands of Roman troops were being mauled in yet another perfectly executed ambush. The sequence and timing of events over the past 24 hours, all planned and orchestrated by Hannibal, so as to lure Minutius into sending his cavalry early on in the battle, thereby depriving him of the ability to scout the vast battlefield, which prevented him from discovering the hidden Carthaginian troops, ultimately resulting in his entire army being ambushed. By now, many Romans gave up and fled, fearing another full encirclement. Seeing Fabius marching down towards the valley, Hannibal reportedly said, "That cloud on the mountains has broken into a storm at last." Finishing off those who weren't able to escape, Hannibal ordered his troops not to pursue, turning his army back towards the main camp. He did not want a battle of attrition against a numerically superior enemy, half of which were rested troops, while his own troops grew tired after hours of fighting. Having defeated the Romans yet again, Hannibal began settling in for the winter at Geronium. Meanwhile, the humiliated Minutius returned supreme command to Fabius, hailing him as his father as a show of respect. Fabius, for his part, reinstated Minutius as his second in command, treating him with utmost consideration. As the year drew to a close, the Roman army stayed at a respectful distance from the Carthaginians, though sporadic skirmishes between scouting parties and foragers continued throughout the winter. Meanwhile, in Spain, the Roman strategy of putting more pressure on Carthage continued, as the Scipio brothers pushed south of the Ebro for the first time, successfully persuading a handful of Iberian tribes to join the Roman cause. This caused grave concern for the Carthaginian authorities, who sought to restore their popularity with the tribes by organizing the return of the hostage children belonging to the tribal nobility, until now held at Saguntum to keep the Iberians loyal. The Punic commander of the city entrusted an influential Iberian noble, Abelox, with returning the hostage children to their parents. However, in a stroke of luck for the Romans, Abelox instead brought the children to them as gifts and was handsomely rewarded. The Scipio brothers subsequently took it upon themselves to return the children to several tribal leaders, taking credit for their rescue. This resulted in massive support for the Roman cause from the Iberian tribes between Saguntum and the Ebro. Back in Italy, Fabius's 6-month term expired, and the Senate did not renew his dictatorial powers, giving temporary command to consuls Servilus, Geminus, and...
Okay, so you can see, at least somewhat, why my thought process or opinion is that Hannibal should threaten Rome. He should have already threatened Rome proper by this point. And it's because Carthage is threatened in a whole lot of different places. Iberia is a big one. And you could pull those troops home in the snap of a finger if you threaten Rome itself. But because you don't, they keep doing their thing. And that's a big threat to the war. Because even though Hannibal is doing very well, Carthage kind of struggles literally everywhere else.
Marcus Attilis Regulus until the following elections resumed in just a few months' time. And now, as the year 216 BC rolled around, a Roman army of unprecedented size was being raised, as the Senate prepared to mount a major effort to engage and destroy Hannibal once and for all. Credit goes to our awesome patron.
Yeah, they're going to raise a huge army, and they're going to go meet Hannibal at Cannae, which is going to come up later in this series. That's the end of parts 8, 9, and 10. Like, comment, subscribe. I will hustle to get the rest of these chunk videos out pretty quickly. And so I'll see you guys next time.